what is understanding of professionals for conservation and reconstruction, and how to save values in urban member of ICOMOS Latvia, cultural heritage expert Janis Krastins. Unfortunately, he cannot be here with us, but his presentation is going to be in video form as to reconstruction and findings. Good morning, dear participants. Today we mark reconstruction world basic technique used for many years. There's anniversary, but up till recently, in many times, this conception was reconstruction. What was building a new heritage object, it was understood in a very different ways. Usually discussion was, if we reconstruct something, then to which period? More ancient period or a newer period, when this cultural heritage was more valuable. But 50 years ago, it was clearly stated in Venice Charter. And this we can see Article 9 of Venice Charter, where it's clearly said, at the time when some conjecture begins, the restoration should be stopped. Obviously, there can be some additional and new contributions, just like in anything humans do, but these contributions at different ages should mirror character of the times. So, and then Article 11 stresses that reconstruction aim is not like unity of one style. That is not the aim of restoration. We see that in St. Peter's Church in Riga, where medieval volume tower was reconstructed later in the 18th century, and then later, and that was completely different in a Baroque form. Then it was reconstructed after the war, and then when restoration work was done, these historical values were taken into account. Another thing that I would like to stress from Article 11 is that it is not when doing historical survey, we should not aim to coming to the very beginning, because then we can destroy later additions, which can be of their own value and high value. Now, as to Cabinet of Ministers 720 from 2021, this is stressed that when restoration is done, underlying state of different time periods should be taken into account. Of course, and here it also states that the original construction system should be saved, and then there's discussion, is original system the one which is the older, and what comes next, it's not the original. And sometimes word authentic is used, and by this usually it's understood there is a very early version, and here one needs to stress that for all ages one needs to evaluate what came with age, what were contributions of the age, and which stratification should be taken into account, and this should be evaluated. These values should be evaluated. This discussion is very topical over the last 100 years, particularly when restoring monuments destroyed during the Soviet time. Discussions were how to reconstruct Melngale's house. Blackhead's house should be restored to the very initial form, like in its Gothic form, or then some other people said that no. At the beginning of 19th century, that was a top shape. At the end, the Blackhead house was reconstructed by building it anew and taking into account artificial stratification over centuries until the house was destroyed in 1948 when Russians blew it remains of this house. And here it's also stressed Riga's charter on authenticity and historical reconstruction in relation to cultural heritage, which says that reconstruction can be carried out without conjecture or comprising existing in situ remains. Each historic period has its own particular style, which does not replicate previous used formal vocabulary and means of expression. So conjecture has can be referring to an older form, referring to earlier ages, which should be taken into account that each age has its own forms of expression. And here's also interpretation. I want to stress again, in Venice charts, this is put in a very accurate way. And this is also here on the screen. At the end, I'd like to refer to the Riga Charter again and say that recreating of such lost monuments should not be accepted in all cases, but only in the cases when such monuments had definite and clear values for our overall heritage, where there is not only this local heritage, but also wider heritage value, and exact documentation for building anew is available. So these are theoretical principles that in one form or another will be envisaged in my presentation further on, where you can see Aistalosis method, which uses only authentic building construction elements, so authentic construction moments, and these cultural monuments are assembled. Here, for example, you see remains of library in Ephes. It's very well known in antique Rome, and of course there's no fake in here. There are only original elements, and by using these elements, with time, this library reading room's entry portal was restored, and here you see what has remained. So, the construction elements were found in archaeological work, and this was transferred to this historical monument. In a similar fashion, not far away from there's Ephes theater, there's fantastic acoustic, and here, when reconstruction was done, this volume was reconstructed by using new and modern materials, since the original materials are gone. but they copy the original form. When we speak of authenticity, we should not only think of material substances, but also we should understand there are 16 different expressions, and authenticity is also form, shape. And in architecture, shape is a leading factor, which also sets a value of architectural work. Here, next I want to refer to Venice Campanella and San Marco Square. In 10 years, it was reconstructed. It was reconstructed in a very exact manner, and again, shape was copied and used. So it's exact replica of original. And next is Riga's view of Riga. This is how spires of Riga churches are depicted. You see there are Baroque elements, Jakob's Church. You can see, for example, this how it looked in 1630 and then in the 19th century. And then when the World War II broke off, you see what had remained of the church. Only outer walls remained, and not all the volume was preserved. They initially were built from wood, and now they were reconstructed as beton in shape, but as to tower, it was rebuilt. It's slightly different now after this last reconstruction. Nevertheless, specialists decided that such approach is justified, and the artificial quality of the church and the tower is not going to be reduced. So it's not made of wood. Initially it was made of wood. Now we have steel construction, and historical form is copied here.
And during our century, or actually previous century, in the hurry of reconstructing the historical buildings damaged during World War II to regenerate the values of these places had been popular and known before. For example, in Frankfurt am Main, where we can see, yes, on this slide, on the picture, we can see a part of Old Town. That is a bird's eye image in 90s of the previous century, when there were a circle of skyscrapers being built on the perimeter of on the border of the Old Town, and we can see the City Hall and a small model of City Hall, how it looked like after World War II, as Frankfurt am Main was very famous with full-fledged tangible cultural heritage sites and architectural sites after World War II, which unfortunately was hugely damaged, as if I remember correctly, more than 40% of that was destroyed. And that sensitive empathy to historical sites and historical values, which was rebuilt, taking into consideration the ancient parcellation of land plots and proportional architecture to of the damaged or destructed buildings. These were 80s of the previous century in a postmodern shape, architectural shape. Unfortunately, recently slide was changed, but in 70s the quite brutal, unproportionate building, a technical city hall, which was located and rebuilt or built anew instead of previously and anciently parceled land plot. Next to it there is Reimers Square, where initially it was decided to reconstruct destroyed buildings during World War II. So they had precise documentary evidence, and that was the lost cultural and historical heritage was regained. But there have been also debates that skyscrapers could be integrated there, but that was just a funny joke on the behalf of architects and professionals. So we can see technical city hall with a disproportionate architectonic shape, and it has disappeared. So this is a look from Mainturm, and precisely reconstructed pre-war buildings were regained, which had these technical drawings kept alive, and historical documentary evidence, photo evidence. And near the Zaalgasse is situated with some layered historical layerings, but in historic proportion being regained. Jugendscheme were very unpersonal. Modern architecture was included, which appeared and occurred somewhere in the 60s and 70s of the previous century, with some famous buildings being documentary evidenced and photo evidence, and they have gained their image as our Blackhead's house in Riga, old town, being totally rebuilt anew in historic shape, but by means of modern materials. The historic opera house, where the bomb was shelled, and it was totally destructed, whereas the historic spatial structure of the hall was replicated, but the decoration was totally left neglected, and while cooler parts were preserved and restored authentically. Totally different approach was chosen in a similar case in Dresden, where famous Zemberg opera was damaged and destructed even more than in Frankfurt. So the walls were kept, but unfortunately everything else was lost, and opera house was expanded. Totally proportionate and historically authentical extraction added, but in the historical part, a very careful, of course that was a very expensive process of restoring all the assembly halls and ways for the public during interruptions. And this Dresden Opera House Hall was very thoroughly reconstructed. So Reichstag in Berlin, which stayed near the Berlin Wall in half preserved way and manner without the dome. There were several options to restore it or reconstruct it. The reconstruction of associated historical dome in a new architectural image, and by means and by using modern materials. So English architect Norman Foster, with 1001 options for the shape, which was associated very close to historical one. This is historical and modern substance synthesis, imaged and exemplified here. Berlin Palace with some significance and layering of Baroque and eclecticism. With a very famous, very prominent and luxury building, which was almost totally destructed. And on East Berlin part of the Republic Palace was functionally built with quite a modern-looking architecture, but it was concluded that the indoor environment was not very healthy and human-friendly when afterwards all these steel structures and frames were torquated by asbestos mass being treated, which weighed several tons. So it is not harmful if it is integrated into the bearing structures, but in total, the general conclusion was made that the building should be demolished and the palace to be restored or reconstructed in historical shape. So if we are looking from the river, something similar was replicated with quite a good correspondence to previous era. But if we are looking from other river side and bank, so totally incompatible with the first part of the palace and quite dysfunctional. The public conclusion and public perception was also quite controversial, and some other attempts of restoration or regeneration were made. If compared to, if we will, it is quite hard to discuss these historical and artistic quality. Another example, Sonny Oriel in ex-former east part of the Berlin, near Berlin Wall, where there was Berlin Philharmonie building, located before, and art gallery, Berlin Library, and when the Berlin Wall was demolished, entire district was regenerated in according to historical one, but using totally modern architecture and construction methods. So one square, historical Leipzig plaza or square, with some similarities of historical space and proportion, without any attempt to replicate a Jugendstil building. The general department store in a style understanding which was architectural icon of Baderhaus general department store style, what we are knowing now as the static Jugendstil. Nowadays, these are, if I'm not mistaken, 10-floor buildings, office buildings. And square has different spatial parameters nowadays, which are more correct in historic sense, if compared or in contrast to the previous historic buildings being restored. Another example is Gdańsk city in Poland, which was very damaged during World War II. but from the very beginning, their fantastic Hanseatic city architecture was decided to be regenerated. And on the left, we can see the river bank of Mohlau river and how it looked like in 50 years ago. And last year, in the 70s of the previous century, modern materials, building materials, were used for the volume of the buildings, where architectonic decoration and final decoration was historically done and proportionate. That decoration and final finishing is prevailing in Gdańsk Old Town, with imaging the typical medieval approaches of facade, final finish, characteristic of Hanseatic time. And these buildings were not located on one side, as we can follow from the medieval fortification being still standing on the image 50 years ago. But on the opposite side, where 10 years ago there was no buildings restored and replicated, these were modern office buildings, which to some extent interpreted this very characteristic silhouette principle of the city, with those facade gables on the facades preserved or restored. And also that has been also used in some other streets, where one side of the street beholds these historic buildings, whereas some other districts and quarters have been built in modern, according to modern principles and by using modern building materials and supplies, but still having and beholding with those characteristic historic elements being included. And exact reconstruction is another example of very famous neo-Gothical, but neo-Gothic Luis Delmenica Montaner, Casanovas, not by his hand, by Gaudi native town, how that house looked like before. 30s of the previous century, when there was civil war going on in Spain, with some damages to Casanovas town. The cable was not restored, and a precise reconstruction of the historic shape and architectural elements being preserved. And of course, architecture is regained to 100%, and this is historic substance and historic value being totally regenerated and regained for the current generation, for the next generation, one of the shedeurs and masterpieces of modern time.
After the war, it was quite popular to reject 19th century and architectural solutions. For example, in Vienna, you can see that these eclectical details were treated as a bad taste, and they wanted to make buildings nicer, and they did. And today we would be calling that primitive approach to architecture, and just a few years ago the building was get this original details, and here are also the historical development was followed, and today we see the way the building looks like. And in 2022, 2023, this building was commissioned, and eclectic architecture is back. Similar case and without lots of discussion was reconstructed Jugend architecture, this building in Wien, which was also destroyed by direct rocket blow. And a very interesting detail here, please pay attention to how these Venice Charter principles were used. Sometimes they are overstressed. Here, St. Paul's Hospital in Barcelona, now it's National Heritage building, World Heritage building, and in the 90s, specialists were very proud with their work. I also was ICOMOS expert at the time. They showed that details were not present. For example, a fragment is missing here, and when the renovation was done, there was a lower hand's part was hand was missing, and the substance of other age was replaced by a material in different color. I think, in my opinion, in my personal opinion, that this is already our interpretation of a Venice Charter. Obviously, their reconstruction should be accurate, but we are regaining lost historic quality. And here it was deformed. For example, here you can see the building in 1997. And here, from the same spot, another photo is taken in 2023. This building, which really does not fit this very fine matter fabric of this area, is remade. Tonality is different, and now the building already fits this fabric, historic fabric of architectural plan. So, in my opinion, this also should be for modern solutions. They should fit what surround them. Then next, I want to speak about castles, Middle-Age castles. We allow to reconstruct these, to build them anew. And there's also lots of discussions how it was back there in Middle Ages. There's not always enough information. And when we speak of ruins, we cannot really be sure that there's lots of artistic qualities in the ruins, because artistic qualities the building had the quality, not only ruins of the building and castles. Here is a Traki castle in Lithuania. It was in the Soviet times. When the restoration work started, there were lots of discussion why this work is done. Lithuanians were scolded by the Soviet government in Moscow, but now we have this reconstructed building. Sometimes, of course, their discussions can take place, and they are completely justified how accurate is restoration. But nevertheless, by and large, it conveys a message of Middle Age architectural values, and also economically, it is very successful. Tourists love this place, and this architecture is profitable. And a similar example is the castle of Narva in Estonia. After the Second World War, this city just was completely destroyed. And now you see this replica remake of Middle Age. Historically, it stopped Russia's drag to the west. And here you see how historically looked this Narva city. It was circumvented by this barriers, these mowers of castles, And now the situation is completely different. Nevertheless, the castle is very rightly fitted to the place. And I think this is a good example of a very successful reconstruction, because historical materials were available and it was possible to do. I think it's a very rich museum with very good exposition. For us, we also, in Latvia, we also have a similar example, Turaida's castle maybe, and partially we also go in footsteps of Narva and Trati, and here you see how it looks, how Turaida's castle looks. There are no historical fakes. The data is the Swedish materials and historical museums are used in different in Sigulda. There was a different approach was used. Here you see very some strata of today's architecture, which is basically just and basically this new form is used by needs of today, and tourists who arrive to Sigulda, they can gain information about historic Sigulda's palace. And sometimes such strata are needed. Also, Bauskas castle palace was also renowned. Lots of discussion has taken place in Latvia. Many things were built anew. New reinforced construction and silicon bricks were used to reconstruct. But in the end, thanks to Mara Skaņa architect's contribution, this castle is rebuilt, and I think this is just a wonderful contribution to renovation and how such palaces can be reconstructed. Also, graffiti outer walls. Here you can see terrace entry. And the approach was used with which I started my presentation in this entrance portal at the top of terrace. It is reconstructed by authentic elements, materials, construction elements, and just recently upper part of tower was reconstructed, and it reconstructs quite closely to how it looks like. Nevertheless, there is no attempt to imitate or interpret other lost constructive elements, and the role of the tower now is for tourist industry. Next object is Ventspils Palace, castle of Ventspils, and now it is being used as museum, and in my opinion it also gained a very good satisfaction side, so glass roof, so we can use this in any weather. Also there are some imitations inside, so, and this is according to the vision of the architect, how what could have been there in the Middle Ages. Also, this lower castle in Vilnius. There is also a reference to Renaissance. This castle, it was removed, so there is not lots of architecture detail which can be used to full reconstruction. And it's kind of like a remake, but this castle is being used and people love it. People treat it as authentic architectural values, but this is a historical fake if you take it by a strict approach. So one should treat history in a very gentle manner, respectful manner. Dundagas Palace here, So, for example, Dundagas castle in Kurland, that was like in a very bad shape during the Soviet times. Nevertheless, some of the parts remained. Some of the parts of this castle was rather eclectic in imitations of Middle Age approach. These were not restored and replaced by these reliefs were used by some, in my opinion, a not successful replica. So sometimes I think you should keep a good fake or replica as trying to achieve original, which is not successful. Next object is Riga's palace, Riga's castle. Just 10 years ago, reconstruction was done. In 2013, there was fire, and lots of top-level halls were destroyed. They were reconstructed in authentic form, language. There were no discussions how this methodological approach should be followed. With time, castle, other parts of the castle were changed. So, for example, here you see how Latvia History Museum part was changed, and also some municipality functions were assigned to these buildings. They were capella and dining room were covered at different levels. So nowadays this regeneration was done, and now this house is being used as representative for representative functions, and the authentic form is followed. And then also windows should be regenerated. There was not enough data available, and they are being made in this manner depicted here, but also size was adjusted to what we have today, and this is how we came to the building we have today, but also we used the scientific form which justifies approach. So Riga's castle has authentic rooms and halls, buildings, so sometimes there are some details in the inner part. So, for example, here in there is a painting of the 16th century. We cannot reconstruct it. We don't have materials. And I think for the average visitor, they just treat it as a choppy job, not a good job. And maybe specialists, like real specialists, would be thrilled by this chose the solution. Because architecture is not archaeology. That is one thing. This is art. Architecture is art, which is meant for everyone. I think this detail is rather successful. So Swedish time arsenal. Fortunately, there is a drawing which we have, and this wing was replaced by this 4-floor volume, and this is how it looks. This remains from this time. Of course, it's a very interesting and well-integrated solution.
Dobela Castle, which was recently restored, which is quite an opposite example of reconstruction. The castle, which had been developing in medieval very large territory, Castello was added in next centuries to a previous site of rooms and ensemble, with the oldest part being used for museum expositions. And above tower part in Capitol Hall, it was anticipated to have a scenery platform for the public, which was very unmasterly done because a staircase was built in such a way that it was harmful and not very safe for people to use them without any injuries, and as how that is compatible visually with historical part. So architect thought that it was some modern architectural frame for genuine historical substance, but that is not a case with those very brutal staples and beams instead of historical arches and vaults existing there before. Another example when instead of lost bastion, a totally different imitation of bastion forms and shape being replicated only, which was modern building with authentic escarp wall ruins being integrated into that modern building, but quite a very violent approach. If humankind has decided that these bastions were not damaged and destroyed by natural disasters, but it was historical coincidence that city had to lose those walls of fortification ruins dating back to 15th to 16th century, which was made the modern infrastructure very hard. And if we are trying to dig something beneath in order to hold some very important parts of the ruins holding no historic substance and value, and we see how one and the second one is disturbed and function is quite limited. Another medieval buildings, which is lake castles, which is an excellent example of restoration and reconstruction with very high level of trust and credibility of authentic. Academia Petrina in Jelgava by Rastrelli, where the lower part was restored. And it is quite justified in modern times that we try to restore that authentic original look, as well as the church tower. One of those was kept only in previous centuries for perhaps military purposes and for fire safety purposes, and during World War II and afterwards it was not preserved. And the church tower spike was restored and reconstructed rather than it was behold in the memory of local population. But that original historic, not totally precise, but very, very similar. And this glass pyramid is totally existing, but it this glass enclosure doesn't let people to come close to the edge and really take a look downstairs to Jelgava city and to the historical buildings surrounding it. As well as in Riga, church tower was disproportionate buildings with gradual regeneration in historic proportion, with some spaces and spatial historic substance being reconstructed in greater detail. Many people are criticizing this Kamari building, which doesn't fit quite well, but with all the accepted approaches and methods for External architecture of city council and city hall has been kept and preserved only, whereas the Blackhead House also have integrated those destroyed parts as being included and integrated very smoothly into a modern functional rooms and a very precise actually reconstruction of architectural shape and architectonic value very precisely, with the rhythm of the building, of the rent house, being reconstructed very well, so that it integrates quite well into the surroundings. A part of facade of the building, of the rent house on Tirgoņu Street, a part of buildings have been reconstructed according to the historical image with in compatibility and in accordance with the historical surroundings and historical atmosphere of the street itself and Pilsoņu Street from one angle. Opposite, unfortunately, negative example of restoration and reconstruction of Jugendstil Art Nouveau building on Dzirnavu Street, which was deteriorated quite a lot. It had to be demolished, disassembled. And according to the request of city council, something similar was requested to be rebuilt, and we have resulted in a historical fake or a replica, very bad replica, with only slight and very scarce features of original architectonic idea, as authentic ceramic tile fragments has been used for to finish the facade, but they are very poorly integrated on the facade, and that is 100% historical fake, really imitating the history. Pliekšēna Villa, or famous Latvian poet Janis, his native surname was Pliekšāns, and in Jūrmala, for instance, his heirs, the Heir family, have reconstructed or actually faked the historical building where the concert yard and also apartments, short-term apartments are located, but only some huge details have been replicated, with these historical details being omitted. Another example which was unique Art Nouveau building on the 13th January Street, and direct precursor of modern movement in architecture, which was replaced with a totally modern glass-framed hotel being built with some even poor replica of modern image without any attempt to replicate or to imitate the historical building. Similar building which was burnt down in 2018 on Kaltīma Street in Pārdaugava, which was a great example of Art Nouveau ensemble on Kaltīma Street in former Āgenskauns or Hagenberg, which really held and hosted some children's outpatient clinic in Soviet time, and due to some disputes among the heirs of and lawsuits regarding the ownership of this building, unfortunately it was burnt down and arson was committed to finalize and stop that dispute, and the building deteriorated totally, and only project has been developed with no actual renovation or reconstruction taking place. Another example, as a final result, we have some planning instructions accepted, unfortunately, by the construction board, but I hope that some other type of facade mortar, pixel facade, where every second brick is laid and extruded slightly outside from the facade, is some attempt to imitate architectural spatial composition, which was the classic misinterpretation of Venice Charter. Perhaps more positive example is substitution of historical with different type of upper window, and similar example is located in Riga when restoring a very interesting eclectic Art Nouveau building on Smilšu Street, where sculpture in the corner on the top of the building was not restored and reconstructed, with some indoor elements being decorated. Inner hall gateway and corridor was reconstructed very well, but restorers decided to imitate by using famous and very popular ornament templates, which were very characteristic for Riga in the 20s of the previous century, actually imitating a totally different era, and that is historical falsification, actually, perhaps, which is very symptomatic for misinterpreting those basic guidelines or fundamental principles being laid down in the Venice Charter. Some also huge debates on restoration and reconstruction of a very famous example of Jugendstil or Art Nouveau decorations, finishings, and the soulless pharmacy, where staircase has been built, which had never existed there before, but with replicas and imitations of staircase elements from the base, fundamental or the main entrance staircase of the building being doubled, and faking historical space and historical substance. And to conclude with a positive example, very successful example of restoration, a very famous Claire's Hotel in Liepāja and Jūrmala Pavilion, Kaiser Pavilion, originally built in early 20s of the previous century, and this is really a masterpiece of Art Nouveau examples in Jūrmala Kurzāle era, with very drastic and plain lanes and seams used for redecoration, but it has successfully regained outdoor or external facade and a very saturated interior. There has been a debate whether it was justified or not. My opinion is that it was very justified. Architects have chosen very precise not to imitate something from Art Nouveau, because authentic and genuine was, as we can see on a documentary on historical pictures with furniture only, but walls, indoor interior decoration didn't include such examples of Art Nouveau indoors. Therefore, these exterior elements, which are interior finishing and also furniture included, as well as equipment, etc., are very contrasting with exterior facade and Art Nouveau finishing.
Nu, tā ir, acīm redzot, arī metodiski pamatot pieeja, kas ir devusi ļoti labu mūsdienu rezultātu.
This is methodically justified approach of how to work with culture heritage